Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
John,
Man,
do you remember how excited you were last week when inflation went down an itsy-weeny bit?
I was thrilled.
You were. Well, this week, the FTSE 100 has gone up an itsy-weeny bit, and we have a new high. So how excited are you today?
Actually, significantly more excited than I was last week.
You wait and you wait and you wait, and finally the thing you've been wanting for happens. So it kind of happens all the time. And stock markets should regularly hit new highs, right? That was a normal stock market would hit a new high all the time. But I do want to say one thing before we go on to talk about how wonderful it is that the FTSE 100 is finally going up. I do want to say that this is not a new high in inflation-adjusted terms. For that, we'd have to get to about, well over 9,168. I calculated it just now, but, don't take my accuracy as real. Say 9,200 to make it a reasonable round number. So we're not there yet in real terms, although, of course, we had to have dividends along the way, so we mustn't be too despondent. But nonetheless, a new high in nominal terms is nice, right? Do you feel that there's a turning point of any kind here?
Actually, I do a bit.
Don't, do you?
I do a bit.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay.
I mean, so, like, one of the things that, I mean, from a purely technical point of view, when stuff makes new highs, it just tends to go on to make more new highs. You've also got the sentiment issue of people noticing that, oh, wait a minute, the UK is doing much better this year so far than the S&P, for example. And I mean, that probably is a bit more significant. You get the Magnificent Seven have come off the boil a bit. And so people were panicking last week because the NASDAQ was down like 1.5%. It was like, oh, the NASDAQ never goes down. But now the FTSE's going up.
They know nothing.
Yes, I know. Let's try being British for a while.
Try being British. I know, I'm telling you. Now listen, John, this is not the first time that the FTSE's done all right? I mean, there is a general view in the market that the US has always had this wonderful exceptionalism about it, and that US markets automatically do better and American stocks automatically deserve a premium. But this isn't true, is it? It's actually quite a recent phenomenon.
It is recent, and I do think, the other thing you often hear with the FTSE 100 is almost the sense that it hasn't gone anywhere since basically the dot-com bust, because it hit about 7,000 in 1999. And the thing is, if you can actually look at the stats, because I looked at them this morning, if you had the choice to buy either UK stocks or US stocks after the dot-com bubble bottomed out, so around about November 2002 or March 2003, and then if you'd held until the top of the banking kind of mortgage bubble in mid 2007, the FTSE 100 absolutely thrashed the S&P. It's actually, depending on the dates, it's kind of like you get anything up to double the return. So the FTSE basically trebled in value, whereas the S&P just went up 100% over that period, and that's including dividends. So it's in whatever currency you want to choose, pounds or US dollars. There's no jiggery pokery here. The FTSE UK stocks roundly beat US stocks during that period, and yes, it's because we had lots of banks and miners, whereas they had banks and kind of consumer staples and things like that. But you would have been better off in UK stocks. So this is a relatively recent phenomenon, and is mostly a post-financial crash phenomenon. And to be fair, it's not just the UK. The US is basically beaten everyone. That's not to say the UK hasn't been one of the worst laggards, particularly in developing markets, but there is no market that has come close to the US, even on the kind of obscure, kind of emerging market side.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the key thing that we'd like to think here is that this kind of thing, the new high, even non-inflation adjusted new high, does draw attention to us, and does mean that people might look over and go, oh, look at that. And we had Nick Train, a very well-known UK fund manager, out earlier this week, talking again about how incredibly cheap UK stocks are, and saying we just need something to draw attention to it, something to make people realize that this is true, that there are fabulous opportunities here, that you have a once in a generational opportunity to buy very high quality stocks at low prices. And his thought was that as soon as there's a very big takeover of a name on the UK market that is internationally known, that is taken over because it is so cheap. That will turn all international investor eyes towards the UK. They will notice what's going on here, and that once in a generational opportunity will be gobbled up fairly quickly.
I mean, I think that's a really good point. I mean, you know, like this week, another FTSE 250 stock was bought up by a US rival. It's like a doors and window frames maker. And we actually saw a bid battle erupt for Hypnosis Trust of all.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that's
a
troubled asset for a while there. And I think a lot of shareholders were probably relieved when they got, you know, the below IPO price bid from Concord, I think it was. But then kind of Blackstone came in and offered more, and suddenly, you know, everyone's off to the races. So
they'll be pretty thrilled to get out of that.
Yeah.
I think.
But I mean, cheapness will out eventually.
Interesting. Now, listen, on the subject of cheapness, I want to talk about my column this week.
Yes, I think you should, because this one
caused a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble. I mean, it's not like I go out of my way to cause trouble, and it's not like I go out of my way to cause controversy on Twitter, X, or anything like that. But this column, you know, I wrote a few weeks ago about how the problem with the UK house building market is that we build lots and lots of tiny, really rubbish houses, and our house builders are culpable there, and I dislike them intensely for building these horrible, horrible houses, although I accept that part of that is driven by regulation and planning stuff, so I'll give them that. So I wrote about how awful tiny houses are. And then this week I thought I'd write another column about how absolutely brilliant tiny houses, but in a slightly different context. I was looking around the coast of the UK, and in particular, you know, some of the incredibly beautiful Scottish islands off the west coast, and some of the Welsh coast and the Cornish coast. And one of the extraordinary things about the coast of the UK is how incredibly unpopulated it is, how few houses there are, how few of us have holiday houses. And when you look at the stats for the UK relative to Europe, a very small number of people in the UK either own or have access to, i.e. not renting, but have access to a holiday home. We don't have the same cabin or sort of hut culture that lots of Scandinavia has, for example, or the second home culture that France has, for example. And our politicians just hate anyone having holiday homes or second homes, although obviously they all have them themselves.
Yes.
But they hate anybody else having them, so you constantly get sort of barrage of insult and new tax. I think our colleague Marcus Ashworth wrote about that a few weeks ago. And so I would just like to make the case, and please everyone go and read the column and tell me if you think I made the case well, for us changing planning completely so that anyone can build a nice little cabin, and I repeat the word nice, you know, Scandi wooden kind of thing, anywhere across the UK where there's space for it. Self-build. Let's get self-build cabins going. So not fewer tiny houses, but more tiny houses. So are you in, John? Are you in?
I think it's a great idea. I think it would really work, and also it'd be a good stepping stone towards perhaps getting more self-build first houses as well, if it worked out. It strikes me as a good experiment. And you also, I mean, people pay like insane amounts of money for these little beach huts on the shore, like at Dorset and all that. And all they've got is space to boil a kettle. You can't even sleep in them overnight. So I think it would work.
There is demand.
Yeah.
There's demand. And you know, when people say, people don't want that. People couldn't possibly, you know, not enough people want to travel to the Hebrides to go to these islands or to a little house, etc. I'm like, yeah, okay. Well, look at the price of a tiny little plot on one of these islands that has planning. You'll pay $100,000 plus for a tiny plot that doesn't even run right down to the beach. That tells me there's demand, right?
No, absolutely. And I think
there's information in those prices.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is just clarify. So because I know that some readers will be sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, she wants to bulldoze, you know, the entire coast of Pembrokeshire or whatever." It's not that. It's this idea of sort of market-driven sympathetic development, because you can only use it for 3 months a year.
So 4 months, you certainly aren't allowed to reside in it permanently. That would be wrong. So you're not allowed to use the infrastructure of the holiday area or the coast. You don't get to use the schools or the hospital, or, that kind of thing. So you just, so maybe you'd pay 50% council tax.
Yeah.
You would probably allow the local councils to build the schools and hospitals that everyone else needs to use, the people who live there permanently. And then you take the proper houses and you'd say, do you know what? These are going to now come with a covenant, so they can only be sold on to locals. And that'd be very bad for the people who paid £5 million for a big house in, say, Rock or something like that. But, too bad. And that would solve the problem of local people saying, well, these holidaymakers are driving up the prices of our houses and then nowhere for us to live, and this is destroying our community. So I think it's a bit of a win-win. And interestingly, as ever, on things like this, the response has been completely down the middle. Half the people saying, brilliant idea, let's do that. And half the people saying, why do you hate us? So, onwards, John, onwards.
Onwards, ever onwards.
I know. I didn't ask our guest about this weekend. We talked about all sorts of other things, but you suggested that we get Helen Thomas from BlondeMoney on because you said she was excellent and would be a great guest, and I think she is. But why did you suggest we had her on?
Well, basically, Helen sent me her latest forecast for what's going to happen election-wise in the UK, and when I read it, I thought, God, that's pretty punchy. I'll need to get you on to discuss that. And I can't remember how much you discuss in the actual podcast, but this, if you want a quick summary, she's basically saying Rishi's going to step down before the election, call it in July, and it will probably be Penny Mordaunt who takes over as the Prime Minister during the election period. And I thought July is a lot earlier than personally I was expecting an election. I thought they would string it out for as long as possible, and they wouldn't even get an interest rate cut before then. So I thought it was pretty punchy.
Welcome to Merryn Talks Money, the podcast in which people who know the markets explain the markets. I'm Merryn Somerset Webb. Here's my conversation with Helen Thomas, CEO of market commentary firm BlondeMoney. Helen has over 15 years' experience working in a number of banks and funds. She's a CFA chart holder and serves on the board of CFA UK. She also has political experience as an advisor to the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne. Helen, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really good to have you on.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Now, let's start with what you've been writing about UK politics recently. And your most recent note is about the next election in the UK. And one of the lines towards the end of the note that particularly leapt out at me was this suggestion that the whiskey and the revolver are already in Rishi Sunak's office. He knows what he has to do. What do you think it is that Rishi has to do?
Rishi Sunak is entering the world of least worst options. And this is because the Conservative Party is polling so badly that we're talking about extinction level events. But by the way, let me just stop for 1 minute and say the reason I started my business was to look at what actually is going to happen, to get away from all the hyperbole that people read in the newspapers about politics, which is just total noise that is a nightmare for people in markets who just want to know what's going to happen. So when I talk about this, it's because of the very low level in the polls the Conservative Party are at, back down to those post-Truss lows, and what that will translate into in terms of seats. Tricky to calculate, but it's clearly now a bad situation, as we're seeing from so many of the polls. So basically, we're in a situation where the Conservative Party itself could be decimated, and will it even survive as a political party?
More than decimated. Way more than decimated.
Yeah, it's just obliterated, maybe, is a better word. Yeah. And so what that means, of course, when you're in politics is where is the blame going to lie? And also, what do the different political actors need from this situation? Because there are people who want the Conservative Party to survive. Maybe that's a surprise to some of the listeners, but there are. And therefore, they now need, for Rishi Sunak to be buried with this situation and in order to resurrect the party in whichever direction they want to take it. And look, by the way, I should also say, doesn't matter what I think, doesn't matter what you think. We're just going to say that these are the calculations that go on with politicians.
Yeah. Can we just go back a little bit and talk about why things are so bad for Rishi Sunak. He's put in place as a stability prime minister, the guy who was going to make everything look okay. And he is delivering a little bit on some of his pledges. You can argue about whether it's down to him in any way whatsoever or his government that inflation has come down. But it has. Of course, the price level has not come down, but the rate of price growth has come down, and that still matters. Small boat crossings are down a bit. We can talk about GDP per head, which is awful, but GDP growth as a whole isn't so awful. So why is it quite this bad for Rishi Sunak?
So there's a couple of things on this. One is the economics, where if you look at a YouGov question of which party is best placed to deal with the economy, and as you might expect, the Conservative Party is now below the Labour Party and has been for a while. But that actually started to get worse well before Rishi Sunak, well before Liz Truss. It actually happened in 2021, 22, as inflation was rising. So the inflation shock has been extremely pernicious. And not just here. President Biden's also facing this in the US. Many other politicians are too. You said it there, Merryn. The rate of change of prices is coming down, but prices are still higher. People still feel it. Perhaps it's slightly part of sort of Rishi Sunak's academic approach to life, that the spreadsheet shows the numbers coming down and that looks good. But to people who fill up their car with petrol, go to the shops, it still feels really quite bad. They still remember it was nowhere near that much to fill your car up with petrol a few years back.
Time goes by and things should be beginning to feel a little bit better because wages are rising quite nicely. But nonetheless, Rishi Sunak's approval ratings just keep falling. Nothing seems to make them any better.
This is where you have to come into the politics of this and the man himself. By the way, I should declare that we were at university together at the same time. As most people, I'm sorry, I'm another Oxford PPEist. Don't know what that qualifies me for these days. But anyway. But it
qualifies you for this.
But yeah, I suppose that's fair. But it means that the way that he became prime minister was actually always going to be a problem for him because, of course, he was a loser in an election campaign against Liz Truss. Now it's just within the Tory party membership, but he lost that campaign. This casts quite a long shadow. He never went to a vote with his MPs when he was up against Penny Mordaunt. People remember back to that period. They were in a bit of a rush to get the prime minister sorted. They never actually had a round of voting. They just said, Penny Mordaunt said, no, look, I'll pull out at this stage. We'll just get on with it. But what that means is you're never really sure who your enemies are. And so the key problem for Rishi Sunak is he built a lot of enemies within his own party of various different kinds. So he's not just got the opposition to worry about. And it's not just one group in his own party. For example, the Trussites. He's got all these other different elements who don't like the way he got there, don't like his focus on certain policies. You should just look at the vote that we've just had about banning the sale of cigarettes to people born after the year of 2009. Now, that went through, but it went through on opposition votes. Half of Conservative MPs either abstained or voted against it. That's quite something. It didn't get covered a lot because it feels like that maybe wasn't that consequential a vote. But he had half of his own party against that. And do the public care that much if they can't get a doctor's appointment, or they're worried about getting on a train because there's a strike, or they're worried about the boats? The key point is he's not very good at the politics, and the public know it.
Well, he's not very good at the politics, and also there's really nothing he can do to improve matters in the time he's got left when it comes to the economy. Can't really do anything about the NHS. It's too late. Can't really do anything about productivity. Can't really do anything about the number of people who aren't in the workforce, et cetera, et cetera. There's very few things that he can really do with this time to turn things around. And that's been obvious for some time now.
The point is actually, was that maybe not obvious when he took over? The Parliament has to end in January 2025. People might be delighted to hear. And so what was that? That was 2 years. And some of that stuff, the productivity stuff, you've been talking about that a long time, Merryn. Anyone following the UK economy, it's been a problem for a decade, if not more. But the other element to all of this is, of course, the Truss period guilt crisis, because that changed the whole narrative of what could be done. Neither the next Labour government, as looks likely, nor this one, feels they can do anything because they're so constrained by OBR, by the markets. So we're in this sort of, death spiral. I hesitate to use that phrase, but it's quite difficult. That taking over in the wake of all of that, as you say, a lot of these long-term challenges would have been very hard to address. It was pretty much almost an impossible task. But the one thing you can do as a leader is lead and inspire and give a vision. And it's been extremely hard to know what that vision is from this Prime Minister.
I suppose one of the things that he has wanted is maybe not to be the vision guy, but to be the stability guy. And that's been a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. But then that's the point about being a sort of technocrat.
This
is an ongoing question, isn't it? Oh, we're sick of experts. Oh, no, we want the experts. Ideally, you want a bit of both. You need the person at the lectern outside number 10 Downing Street should have a really simple message. I don't know, Tony Blair's education, education, education. People knew what that was. And then you need people around you to implement it. And it failed on both fronts.
Okay, so we know he's got to go. I think it's pretty obvious to everybody that Rishi Sunak is not going to be Prime Minister for much longer, either pre or post an election, right? It is nearly over. So why is it taking so long? He has all these enemies. It's perfectly clear that maybe he isn't the best person to lead into the next election. It's perfectly clear he certainly isn't going to be the Prime Minister after the election. So if we know all these things, why is it taking so long for him to go?
Because the enemies need the method of dispatch to work in their favour. So this is where the politics comes into play, because there is clearly going to need to be a resurrection of the Conservative Party. There is a group that felt the Truss vision should come back. There is a group that feel it needs to be very much more centrist and sort of address some of these migration issues and end the nasty party, as Theresa May once called it. Battle for the soul of the Conservative Party, but nobody wants to be the one to finally stab in the knife. And what's quite interesting in this has been Nigel Farage, because there's no doubt that Reform UK are doing well in the polls. They've got quite an important thing in any election campaign, which is momentum. That is absolutely crucial in any election campaign, is to have the momentum. And what's happened is, as you said, it's all petered out a bit, which if you compare to when the Brexit Party came into being, it was around 4 or 5%. And within 3 months, it was polling at 24% on one of the polls, topping the polls. It's certainly doable. But if you read interviews with Nigel Farage, he talks about how he doesn't want to be the man that actually vanquishes the Conservative Party, because I think the quote is, people are quite tribal. They remember this stuff. They may think he has some good vision of what party should be, but actually being the one to stick the knife in does not tend to go well for the person who does it. So there's kind of a sequencing going on at the moment. There's like a kind of shadow boxing happening where everyone is waiting now for Rishi Sunak to fall on his own sword. Because if he falls on his own sword, then, they rush in to be the saviour. They're not the ones who actually brought him down. And so they're trying to make it clear to him, it's in your own interest to step aside. And that's why I talk about the whiskey and revolver is already in Downing Street. And you're starting to see this come through with reports. Oh, we're thinking about maybe we could do an earlier election. We could go in 4th of July has been floated as a date, rather than this thought it could be October, November.
Okay, so let's say he does fall on his sword. Who takes over? How does that work? I mean, obviously, we're all in the world of guessing here. I'm not asking you to make clear, firm forecasts, but to your mind, what looks the most likely?
No, we do, Merryn, actually. We do, because we will always make a forecast. And if we're wrong, then that's a good chance to say, why were we wrong? Where was the analysis wrong? Now, the person taking over has to have some claim to the position. So Penny Mordaunt is in pole position by virtue of having come second to Rishi Sunak last time round. Also to the fact she has quite a lot of support amongst the local associations. Because here's the thing, and I know there's been lots of Vernon Bogdanor, who's professor of constitutional politics, saying, it's a constitutional outrage if we had yet another prime minister. But they'd purely be prime minister for the election campaign. And that means that actually some of the other names that are talked about, like the Kemi Badenochs of this world, in some respects, it's better for them to wait till after the election, because Penny Mordaunt, for example, has a much lower majority than Kemi Badenoch. So there's a chance that actually Penny might not make it through that election campaign. She wanted to keep her seat. So Kemi Badenoch could not be tainted with a loss and then pick it up afterwards. This is one of these nefarious calculations that politicians have to make. I always say, by the way, because I've worked in both politics and finance, that business people get very frustrated by this, because business is about what works, but politics is about what sells. And you've got to remember who you're selling to. And that changing the team into an election campaign, of course, the electorate, the public at large will be like, what is going on? But because it's an extinction level event, the Tories are talking to their own activists in the midst of it going so badly. The last thing you want is you're not going to have people knocking on doors, delivering leaflets, not feeling motivated to bother. They've got to G those people up. So someone like Penny Mordaunt, who herself wrote to the Telegraph and said she'd visited 70 local associations in the last year, is that kind of G'ing up the base.
Keep an eye on Penny, basically.
Yeah.
And keep an eye on the possibility of Rishi standing down in the next few weeks, Penny possibly replacing him and going into a general election in the beginning of July.
Exactly. That's our core scenario now.
Okay. All right, let's skip forward then, because I think we can then guess what happens, whoever might replace Rishi Sunak or whether he decides to go for it himself. However that happens, we are most likely to end up with a Labour government after that and Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. And very few people are negative about that scenario. Most people are fairly positive about that scenario, see it as obviously we need change. How do you see it?
Just picking up on your point there about change, because I've been thinking about this. Because change normally means massive enthusiasm and optimism of, yeah, let's go for this person, right? This is the change. I think what people want is competence. Ironically, of course, as we've discussed, Rishi Sunak was supposed to deliver that. But they just want someone to get a grip of it, get your party in line, get things organised and make things work. And that's a minimum before we've talked about trying to get growth and trying to...
Yeah, but that is change right now. At the moment, nothing seems to work. Nothing seems to work. So anyone who can make something work, that seems like very positive change. And the idea that stuff might work is about as optimistic as I'm prepared to be at the moment.
It is, but like from a purely, political, academic perspective, when you think about change, you tend to think about change as a vote for something, whereas some of this support for Labour is a vote against what we currently have. So that's interesting because it means that have people really thought about what a Labour government will do? And they've done an extremely good job. I must say, it's a very well-disciplined campaign the Labour Party are pursuing. They're keeping on the same song sheet. They're not scaring the horses with anything, particularly the markets on the economic and finance side. But I would draw attention to Rachel Reeves's May's lecture, which might sound extremely dull, but is absolutely worth reading for giving a revelation into what Rachel Reeves really thinks about the economy.
Okay, what does Rachel Reeves really think?
So
more radical things than most people think she thinks, I suspect.
Exactly. Well, what was quite amazing about the way that was briefed to the newspapers is lots of people are like, oh, it's exactly the same as Rishi Sunak. Oh, you're saying the same things. Oh, what's the difference? I'm actually going to just quote a bit of it, if I might, for 1 second. It's just a couple of lines, Merryn, right? So this is from Rachel Reeves's May's lecture. A model based on the pursuit of narrow-based, narrowly shared growth with ever-diminishing returns cannot produce adequate returns in growth and living standards, and nor can it command democratic consent. Now, what she's saying there is capitalism is too narrow. We need to be broader about how we share the proceeds of growth. But the key part's right at the end, nor can it command democratic consent. She's suggesting there capitalism itself erodes democracy. It will blow up the system, and therefore socialism is the only way for the world to proceed. Now, some people may agree with that, some people may not, doesn't matter. But that's what she's set out in this May's lecture of what she thinks. And it has some fairly radical implications because it means that, and she goes and talks a lot in the speech about we want to pay more money to people with high skills, but then she also says we really want to give more money to people with lower skills. And in fact, we don't really care about money. We just want people to be happy and we want workers to have
secure.
rights.
We want people to be secure.
Oh, secure, yeah, which nothing bad can happen because if bad things happen, people won't take risks. And that's pretty radical. Now you're starting to say, whoa, hang on a minute. So if I just go off and start a business, does that mean I'm bailed out whatever happens? Which is pretty much the opposite of a capitalist approach. And so that's fairly, it's a pretty radical left-wing approach. She quotes a lot of economists in there, if you can bear to read all of it. And I know it's difficult people to get through some of this stuff, but it's worth it because it's the first time we've really heard what she thinks. And she mentions a lot of fairly left-wing economists in that piece.
Yeah. And basically, we've been on a path to big and bigger government for quite a long time. And everything that she says suggests that we're on a path to even bigger government and that there's many new organisations that are going to be set up. Apparently there's the Wealth Fund, there's a British Energy Group and Skills England, et cetera, et cetera. There's an endless list of new groups, new institutions that are going to be set up to
new government
groups that are going to extend the reach of government into pretty much everything. It's hard to see any way in which government as a whole can't get bigger and bigger under this regime.
Absolutely. And as I say, it's been a good job of trying to brief it out that it's not too frightening. And she makes a throwaway point about the fiscal rules. I will stick to the government's fiscal rules, except we will allow borrowing for investment purposes. Actually, that's quite Gordon Brown. And it's
very Gordon Brown.
It initially doesn't sound maybe that scary. But as we know with governments, okay, so it suddenly becomes the case that you can classify something as, oh no, that is borrowing for investment because it's going to do this, or we've teamed up with this organisation to do that. It's a bit like in Germany where they have all the debt rules and they try to keep a balanced budget, but then, oh, hang on a minute, we've got this fund over here and it's not on the balance sheet exactly, and it does borrow and it does do things. And it's one of those things where once the door is slightly open, you can just push it and ram in more. So I think tax and spend is quite easy to see happen underneath that framework that we see in that May's lecture.
But where do taxes go? How high can taxes in the UK go without getting to the point where it becomes a little self-destructive? It feels to me like we're already knocking on that door, but then I live in Scotland.
Yes, exactly. This is a very good question, and till the pips squeak, as has been said in the past. One of the things we do know about this new Labour government will be the VAT on private school fees, which they, I think, are claiming will raise £2 billion, which, by the way, is a massive just drop in the ocean compared to the hundreds of billions that were borrowed during COVID and the size of the deficit.
And possibly compared to how much it's going to cost to take all the children who leave private schools into the state sector.
This is it. You started to see already surveys of parents and an analysis that suggests that far from raising anything, best it could be neutral or might even cost money. And that's obviously the point about these tax rises. So therefore, when I look at that policy as that being one of the few that we know about, it suggests to me, when you say where else could these taxes come from, it could be some sort of a wealth tax, or of course it may not be branded as that, could be branded as a second home tax above a certain level, or it's quite possible that you could start to see extra taxes coming in called something else. Let's not shy away from this, of course. The Conservative government introduced a health and social care levy. So, you know, what they're realising, what they've spotted is the Overton window has shifted. And as you said, there is a bigger state. It is bigger.
And there are lots of spaces for wealth taxes. I mean, everything from, you know, whether you approve them or not is by the by. There's lots of places you can put in place new wealth taxes. There's CGT on private homes above a certain level, for example. Yep. And we're already seeing things like double council tax on second homes. I mean, that you can call it what you like, but it's a wealth tax. That's exactly. So we're seeing those throughout the structure of the tax system. And then, of course, there's capital gains tax, which is unindexed to inflation. So is therefore an automatic wealth tax. And all you have to do is put that up. And you've got really a relatively high wealth tax. They're all over the place.
Exactly. So I just think, you know, we could expect to see more of the same. So that for markets, it's going to be quite interesting, actually, in terms of global capital, because, of course, these challenges facing the UK are not just restricted to the UK, Western Europe, somewhat in the US. But, of course, the US has been interesting in terms of actually having some growth. And where that seems to be coming from, the difference that I see is they've had a huge amount of visa issuances in the US over the last 2 years. They've had a lot of immigration. Whatever you might think about it, does seem to be contributing to more growth and also slightly bearing down on inflation as that growth has come, which is why we've sort of had a bit of a Goldilocks period for the US economy in the last year. Whether it will last, we'll now see. But I can understand people getting very energised about the question of immigration, because there is the concept, okay, the pie might grow as immigrants become assimilated and work, but then it might shrink if they are taking from the state more than they are giving. And I think this is a huge topic in the UK. We've seen, of course, this Rwanda policy going on and on. It's quite clear that Rishi now thinks that another argument, by the way, for a summer election could be that election happens as the first flight leaves for Rwanda. But it's a hot button topic everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, the question, as we mentioned briefly earlier, it's all about GDP per head as opposed to just GDP. It's all very well seeing GDP go up by 0.5% here, 0.5% there, 1% here, whatever. But if GDP per head is constant or falling, and if, while everything works on an income basis, but nonetheless, we have a massive shortage of infrastructure as our population grows, this is where the problems come in. You have
this
a
is the
fast-growing
tension.
population, and you may have a short-term boost to GDP, but that doesn't help you out in any way with the hospitals, the roads, the schools.
This is where, when you talk about the Labour Party coming in, they are going to face an awful lot of challenges. And remember, they've been out of government for a long time. Although they're getting advice from the Blair-Brown period, and there are plenty of advisors who are involved. Actually, getting into government is very different, as the Conservatives have seen. And remember, the Conservatives did have a majority of 80, and they still struggled. So I know there will, of course, be the excitement that, Labour are in and they win a big majority. But just as the Conservative Party have struggled with the right wing, there will also be a left-wing element to the Labour Party that says, wow, we've got the mandate, let's do this stuff. And that could well cause tension for Keir Starmer as well. So it's going to be an extremely difficult period for whoever.
I always think it must be actually becoming Prime Minister must be one of the most disappointing things in the world. You spend so long working towards it. You have all these ideas. You spend years criticizing other people and criticizing the way economies are run, societies are run, politics are run, etc. I could do it better. I could do it better. You get into number 10 and you find, my God, it's so hard. And you can't just say, let this happen. And it happened, because it's not like that. You have much more limited power than you believe you have on the way in. And it's only when you get there that you find out just how little power you really have over an economy, over a society, over a justice system, etc.
Yeah, the levers are really hard to find, and there isn't one that's marked, click here, you'll get everything done. Absolutely not. It's that constant selling that I was talking about, they do to the electorate, they're doing it internally, they're doing it to the civil service, they're trying to get the project going. I should say, by the way, that also applies in the US. And there's always, and in fact, even more so in the US because of the separation of powers. In the UK, you've got the executive sits in the legislature. In the US, it's separate. In terms of what the US president can actually do, they are severely constrained, even with a majority for their party in the other elements of Congress. One of the things I always found when people were critical of Donald Trump was that he often seemed to be casting around for the levers and failing abysmally to find them, and then missing the ones he did have. He didn't seem to grab the power even as best as he could. I want to make a broad and important point about all of the world and the politics and what's going on right now, because sometimes people can feel terribly upset, and I get it. But if we look at what we've gone through for these last 4 years, locked up at home, war on Europe, war in the Middle East, inflation for the first time in many people's lifetimes, if we weren't angry, what on earth is going on? Of course, people are going to be furious. And then that means we should see radically different political parties emerging, different kinds of leaders, and huge political volatility. So actually, this current phase that we're going to go through now, another spasm for the Tory party, then the Labour Party will come in, and then it'll be difficult because they also need to grasp these big challenges. We're talking about at least a decade more of really dramatic political change across the world, but particularly across anywhere with a democracy. And I mean, kind of part of me is wildly excited and frightened at the same time, but it's what people in markets need to pay attention to. I'm afraid you're not going to be able to stop thinking about politics for a while.
Well, that brings us to the next thing I was going to ask you, which is, what does this mean for markets, and particularly for markets in the UK? I have conversation after conversation on this podcast about the awfulness of UK capital markets and what can possibly happen to get some flows starting to come back into the UK. And I suppose one hope might be, the change of government might make global investors say the UK looks like a place that might begin to reintegrate a little with Europe and this kind of thing. So maybe the Brexit discount might begin to disappear and investors may start to come back to the UK. This could be one of the catalysts that we've been waiting for, or is that too optimistic? I did have a guest on last week who insisted that the Labour Party absolutely get it and will be very careful of our capital markets.
I think it's going to be a game of two halves. I think when the Labour Party get in, by virtue of having won and having a majority and everyone being on board with that within the party, at least to start with, it's going to look good. It's going to look coherent, and it looks quite clear that they will try and seek a more conciliatory link with Europe, at least. So I would imagine, yes, some of that kind of optimism is quite well founded in the first sort of year or two of the Labour government. And just some of that sort of uncertainty premium of the last few years of it just all looking like a total shambles and a mess, because the Labour Party will end up they'll do a fair few things to start with, but it's not the sort of thing that would frighten investors, I don't think. The trouble will come when we talk about how they're not going to have any money to do anything. They face all the same challenges. Where's the growth going to come from? Where's the productivity? and the temptation then to start on some of those wealth taxes, I would imagine that might be quite perturbing for international investors.
But it's a couple of years out. Okay. And interest rates and inflation in the UK, where do you see them going? Now we're getting on to the tricky questions. We've done all the easy stuff.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Because I always feel like Rishi Sunak's a bit of a hedge fund punter on interest rates. I think that he's as much a gilt trader as anybody else, because I think he thought, oh, great, we're going to get inflation down. We're going to get 3 rate cuts before I have an election. Brilliant. And that's not going to happen. I mean, the big theme that we all have to come to terms with is inflation is going to be higher than it was in the 15, 20 years prior to the pandemic. It just is, because the world is being redrawn. There's more inefficiencies as we go to a new equilibrium. And that just means there'll be higher inflation. So therefore, all else equal, interest rates should be higher. But I think it's clear that we're going to get a cut or two from the UK this year, a bit more from the EU, because they've got a bit lower growth and a bit more consensus, I should say, on the ECB. But of course, the US, I looked at this alleged pivot that the Fed made in December, and I thought, what are they doing it now? This is odd. The data doesn't really seem to suggest that they need to do this. The market's been expecting cuts all year. They never delivered them. Growth's good. Inflation's good. What are they on about? And I thought the only thing can be this US election, in a way. I know they are politically independent, but they are appointed by politicians, and it would help Biden to have a couple of rate cuts before November. And now the Fed's in quite a sticky wicket because it's not going to do anything this month. It's got June where, maybe they'll have to do one or signal it. Then they've got 2 more meetings before the US election. And then once you get too close, you start to look a bit too political. It's tricky for them. Sorry.
Central banking.
On the Fed,
central banking, it's tricky.
Yeah. A better answer, a more coherent answer. The rate cuts that will come will make very little difference to actual economic conditions. There you go.
Yeah, look, this is the interesting bit that John and I talk about a lot, that you may get from these levels, you may get a cut here and a cut there, but absolutely the incorrect response to that would be to expect rates to keep falling back down to the low levels we've seen in the past. Any cut from here could be reversed, could stay there for ages. We have to assume that something around 4-5% is the norm. And you'll see cuts or rises around that level.
And that's what we had, I think, in the sort of mid-90s period. And we have to all come to terms with the fact that was the aberration. 0 interest rates. Why is there this obsession that once you get up to the long-term normal average, would you go back down to 0? Just seems odd.
All this effort spent getting up, you want to stay up. Now, listen, last question, absolute last question, I promise. This is the one we have to ask everybody at the end. If you are only allowed to invest in one asset class over the next 10 years, and that asset class could only be Bitcoin or gold. I might be bigging Bitcoin up a little by calling it an asset class. Hate mail to the usual address. Which one of those would you choose?
Wow, just Bitcoin or gold? Goodness me.
That's it. That's all you got.
Battle of the safe havens, perhaps, is what they might call it. Bitcoin.
Oh, tell us more.
And I say that as someone who does not understand it enough, wants to, owns a little bit, has been learning a lot about it, has been learning about cold storage and all this stuff. I think that there is a safe haven argument for Bitcoin over gold in the technological era by saying that it exists virtually and not physically, because I think our future is virtual, not physical. So therefore, something that's in the cloud is going to do better, that can be moved around in the palm of your, literally in a device in the palm of your hand, will have more long-term value than gold. But I don't think I want either of them, Merryn. Sorry.
Oh, okay. What do you want instead then? I'm opening the world to you.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Just you. Normally I don't do this. As you definitely don't want either of them, what would you take instead? I'm still only giving you one asset class for 10 years.
Can I do US tech stocks?
You can.
Not too broad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's not too broad.
I was going to pick just one of them, and then I feel a bit like, that's tricky because, Nvidia is doing very well at the moment, but is its technology always going to be ahead of the curve? No, I think we're, again, taking a massive long-term historical view of everything that's going on. We're in a technological revolution, just like the Industrial Revolution, and we've got to embrace it. It is the future, and therefore you want to be on it. And where is all the advance happening? And it is the US. So There you go.
Okay, US tech stocks it is. Helen, thank you so much. This week, to debrief on my conversation with Helen, I've got John Stepek and also Bloomberg opinion columnist Adrian Wooldridge. And Adrian, just before we get into our discussion about this week's interview, I want to let our listeners know that you are co-hosting your own podcast, a new one, a series that launches today called Votonomics. You, Stephanie Flanders and Allegra Stratton, you'll be coming together weekly, having conversations about the elections taking place this year that are shaping the geoeconomic landscape. And this week's episode is a conversation with Neil Ferguson.
Absolutely.
Something to look forward to. We'll all be listening to that. Right, onwards. John, I'm going to ask you first because I always do. What did you think about this conversation with Helen, which you suggested, by the way? We had Helen on because you suggested we did, and I thought that was an all right suggestion.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I thought it was very interesting. And I thought, actually, the idea that Rishi is going to step down of his own accord and then call a summer election is quite a punchy call. And she did seem pretty comfortable to, put that out there. So I thought it was kind of worth kind of talking about, because if that happens, that surprised me as an idea.
Interestingly, John, after we recorded that conversation, I had a couple of conversations with other people who think they're in the know, or maybe are in the know, and they pretty much all said the same thing.
Oh, okay.
So I got independent backup of that opinion. It's definitely floating around as a distinct possibility.
At the end of the day, I'm not plugged into Westminster, and there's a part of me that finds the whole gossip side of it kind of boring, but it is important. And I do think that, if anything, I actually think your discussion about what will happen afterwards was, if anything, more interesting, because that's the idea that, Labour get in, and at the moment everyone seems to be kind of comfortable with that and happy enough about it and assuming it's going to be something along the lines of business as usual. But clearly, when you look at the state of the public finances, that's just not possible. There's got to be a change, and the big difference between Labour and the Tories is that the Tories at least have to pretend to be a low tax party, whereas there's no such kind of restriction on Labour once they get in.
I don't know why they bother with the pretense. Adrian, let me bring in you. And do you fancy the idea of Penny Mordaunt as Prime Minister? How's that working for you?
I think it's a very interesting sort of question. I think a lot depends on what happens to the mayors in the local elections. I think if a bunch of councillors lose in the local elections, people, even if the number is very large, people think, who cares about these local councillors? If you lose a big city, let's say Birmingham, then the party really does begin to panic. And I think that Rishi steps down rather than having another act of regicide, quite interesting. And I think if anybody were to replace him, I think Penny Mordaunt would be a very, very good choice in all sorts of ways. One is that she's, an attractive and articulate figure. She carried the sword extremely well during the coronation, which is no mean feat. It's a pretty important qualification for running the country these days. Also, she has a good feeling for the upper working class vote, the white working class vote. Her constituency, which is Portsmouth North, was a Labour constituency before she took it over. She's converted it into a pretty solid majority at the moment, and nothing will be solid whenever the election comes. But up to now, it's been pretty solid. She knows how to deal with that sort of version of the red wall down in the south, and she's a better retail politician, a more attractive retail politician than Rishi, who is a very clumsy retail politician and a technocrat. So if I were a Tory wanting to save my seat, I'd rather have her than him. And also thinking from the national interest, the interest of the country, I think we are perhaps, if things continue to go as they are with Rishi, looking at an absolute catastrophe for the Tory party and a very big Labour majority. And I think very big Labour majority might be a very worrying thing. It'd be a very worrying thing for the city. It might be a very worrying thing for Keir Starmer, who might not want to have this huge pressure, not only of expectations, but of MPs who will find it more and more difficult to control the more of them there are.
But do you think that changing Prime Minister at this point, swapping Rishi for Penny, would make any difference to the result of the election? Kind of feels like it wouldn't at this point.
I think that you can change the narrative a bit. I think at the moment, as long as it's Rishi, it's failure, it's the sort of sex frenzies of these various MPs, it's whatever the latest story is. If you put a new person in the front, it's like reviving a soap opera, and you at least have a chance to change the story. And I think she's a better face for the party. Now, if you really force me to put money on the line, I say no, the Tory party's finished. It's for the moment it is. People have made up their minds. But I think as a sort of hospital pass, I'd go for it.
With reform out there, with the Workers' Party out there, is there any chance for hung parliament? We naturally assume that there's going to be a massive Labour majority simply because the Tories are in such horrible state. But there are other parties.
Yeah, but the Reform Party cannibalises the Tory vote, and the Tory vote is still going down and the Reform Party is still going up at the moment. So I think it is splitting the right. And again, that's another reason why I think there is a danger, if you want to look at it from that point of view, at least a possibility of a very substantial Labour majority. And what you might have is a very weird world in which you have a substantial Labour majority, just like in 97. But in 97, you had a lot of enthusiasm. New Labour, new beginning, Tony Blair, very good at his job. You'll have a substantial Labour majority with nobody really having many expectations for them. Boring Prime Minister, expectations of things actually going pretty dismally, no money to spend. And so more of the same mood of despair, but with a different bunch of people to kick and complain about.
You say that it would all feel pretty dismal, but John and I were talking about this the other day and thinking that possibly a large Labour majority would make everyone feel mildly optimistic, largely because they don't quite understand what a very large Labour majority would mean over the medium term, but just because there'd be this sense of something vaguely new and of stability.
Yeah, but if the person who's the front line of the act is Keir Starmer, it's hard just to get excited. Or can you get excited about Rachel Reeves or many of the rest of them? I don't think you can. And I think the Labour Party is going to go into power with no money to spend, a lot of expectations for fixing potholes and fixing hospitals, which they can't fulfill. And if I were a sort of hyperactive left-wing columnist, I'd be looking forward to a great future, denouncing the Labour Party and saying they betrayed everything and that we should go back to a more Corbynite policy. I'm afraid.
I mean, that is part of the problem,
fun.
isn't it? It's the kind of crowd
if you're
control.
Irresponsible. Yeah.
It's like, how do you keep the kind of far left under wraps once they're in power, as opposed to keeping them shut up until you get power?
If you've got a restricted majority, you can give a lot of people jobs, which means money, which means you can basically afford to live in London. If you haven't got that, if you've got all these hungry people outside, well, the temptation to go down the Owen Jones line is greater.
Okay, so what do you think when you say this is dangerous and this is frightening? What is it that you are expecting policy-wise in the early days that might scare the horses?
Well, I think what's going to happen is that they will have pretty conservative macroeconomic policy, that they will continue with a lot of the Tory policies. That will create a lot of frustration. They'll have a bit of promises on fixing the National Health Service, fixing the potholes and all the rest of that, which they won't have any money to do. They'll increasingly be tempted to engage in gesture or performative politics, which will, I think, solve no problems and actually increase the potential for polarisation and discontent. And I can see after not very long of a sort of basically inert Starmerish Labour government, a surge in support for Corbynism and a surge in support for, anti-woke policies, or whatever you want to call them, Farage-style policies on the right. So, a dismal but more polarised Britain.
And we're all going to be desperate to have Rishi back in 6 months.
Oh, we'll say a technocrat, a sensible guy. Can't we have something like that?
We were talking earlier in our introduction about the market, new highs for the FTSE 100, etc. Is there any optimism from either of you that the assumed stability of a Labour majority and perhaps a little more friendliness with the EU, as I discussed with Helen, might actually be good for the market, possibly bring some international investors back in, or at least stop the outflow from the UK? Or perhaps another way of putting it, perhaps there'll be regulations that will prevent the outflows from the UK.
I just think that if you're looking around the world at the moment, the US is so dynamic and so tempting that I don't see why the UK would be attracting you when you could go to the US instead.
I suppose that depends on whether they vote Trump back in November.
No, but I think that Trump will be could be a huge boost for the United States. I mean, cutting capital corporation tax, cutting taxes, I think deregulating quite a bit, rolling back a lot of green stuff. I think it'll suck huge amounts of money and indeed talent from Europe, from Britain into the United States and make the boom even bigger than it's already been. And you must remember that the first 2 or 3 years of the last Trump administration before COVID came and he started telling people to inject themselves with bleach. I mean, the economy was booming, and business was saying, he may be a nutter, but he's our nutter. And I can see that coming back.
More US exceptionalism then, basically.
Yeah, of a slightly different kind and more exceptionalism from us of a bad kind. Adrian, John, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's Merryn Talks Money. We will be back next week. In the meantime, if you like our show, rate, review and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And finally, we have our show email, so send along ideas, questions or comments to merrynmoney@bloomberg.net. And if you have ideas on when Rishi's going to go and who the next Prime Minister will be, please do let us know. This episode was hosted by me, Merryn Somerset Webb. It was produced by Sam Sadi, additional editing by Blake Maples. Special thanks to Helen Thomas and, of course, to John Stepek and Adrian Wooldridge.